I wasn't planning to post a video this weekend, but Friday night I turned on the TV and I tuned it to MSNBC, and literally within seconds after I had turned the channel to MSNBC, Chris Matthews was on the air talking about the results of a poll that found Americans. Well, let me just let you take a look for yourself.
Americans increasingly see the country divided between rich versus poor. A new Pew poll has found that 66% of Americans, two-thirds, now say they see a strong or very strong conflict between the rich and the poor. And that's a 19-point jump since 2009, just a couple of years ago. Joining me now to talk about this is Assistant Democratic Leader, U.S. Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina, and MSNBC political analyst Ezra Klein, who's also a Washington Post columnist.
Jim Clyburn and Ezra Klein in the same segment? Talk about a load of intellectual firepower.
Congressman Clyburn, thanks so much for joining us. This new Pew poll shows that people across demographic lines increasingly see this class conflict, if you will. The numbers are up for whites, blacks, and Hispanics, but look at the change among whites alone. The percentage of whites who say there is a strong or very strong class conflict between rich and poor has jumped 22 points since 2009. What do you make of the cause of that? What's causing that?
Well, I think that the tax policies that we have operated under over the past few years.
Okay, stop right there. Now, when he says the tax policies that we have operated under over the last 3 years, then you would think, okay, he's going to talk about the Obama tax policies, because that's over the past few years, right?
Ever since we had the so-called Bush tax cuts, people began to see that there was something untoward about the way those tax impacted certain groups in our society.
Oh, God.
We had a GAO study that I brought up and tried to discuss every chance I got during the so-called super committee, where it said that the lower 20% quintile in our society over the last 28 years have seen an increase of only 16% in household incomes, when the upper 20% saw a 65% increase in their household income, and that upper 1%, 275% increase in household income. And
Okay, I'm familiar with that study. At least I'm familiar with a study that sounds like what you're talking about, but it was provided by the CBO, not the GAO. Regardless, as I noted in a previous video, actually there were a couple of videos I was in which I discussed this. There are a couple of problems with that, what he's saying, and one of them, it has to do with the conclusion that he's drawing, which is that it's somehow a problem that everyone's gotten richer. Everyone has seen an increase in their income, at least every quintile, but somehow the top quintile has seen much more gain than the lowest quintile. Another problem is that he's acting as though, at least from what he's saying, it sounds like he's pretending that these quintiles are the same people, but they're not the same people. Remember this?
They divide the country into the top fifth, middle, and bottom fifth. And the liberal groups say the top fifth has gotten richer and the bottom fifth has dropped or stayed the same. But it's a new bottom fifth. They did a study in 1990 where they took the people that were in the bottom fifth and said, where were they 10 years later? Only 16% of them were still in the bottom fifth. 18% were in the top fifth.
Yeah, capitalism
and the rest were in
gives
between.
people the opportunity.
Individual upward mobility.
Absolutely.
So it's not that much of a problem, right? Because you have income mobility, as Dick Morris just explained. The empirical evidence is overwhelming. The top quintile, or whatever you want to say, the top 1%, the top 20%, they're not the same people that were in the top 1% or the top 20% 10 years ago. And same with the lowest quintile. But then, and this is what happens when you let politicians who aren't, quite right in the head continue talking for long enough, they dissolve into a bunch of incoherent babble.
So it's very clear what's going on here. And you look at the budget that the House passed, the so-called Ryan budget, a budget that got rid of Medicare guarantee, an increase of about $6,400 a year for people on Medicare. That would only plunge them further into debt and deficits and no income.
Now, I'm not quite sure what he was saying there, but he made reference to the Ryan budget plan. The Ryan budget plan, aka the Path to Prosperity, was put into a bill that passed the House without a single Democratic vote. But it would not, as the congressman suggested, end Medicare. In fact, not only would it not end Medicare, but that line about it, ending Medicare actually was dubbed Lie of the Year by PolitiFact, a Pulitzer Prize-winning St. Petersburg-based fact-checking organization. Now, I know that there are some of you out there who don't trust PolitiFact, and I admit I myself have doubted them in the past. In fact, I've actually written multiple articles on my blog in which I point out some of the glaring flaws in their analyses. Coincidentally enough, one of my articles actually mentions a case involving Congressman Clyburn. So, yes, PolitiFact has made some mistakes in the past, but I think they were right on with this one, calling the whole end Medicare talking point lie of the year. Now, it was very hard to decipher most of what the congressman said in that clip. He mentioned some $6,400 number. I'm not sure where he got that, although I have a pretty good idea of where he pulled it out. I'm just... but the funny thing is that statement, that whole jumble of words there was so incoherent that Chris Matthews didn't really even respond to it. He just sort of moved on to his next question. Listen to this is what Chris Matthews said right after Clyburn stopped talking.
Well, more and more people are seeing this conflict you're talking about, Mr. Clyburn, regardless of party. This is very interesting. The poll found 55% of Republicans, 73% of the Democrats, and 68% of Democrats say there is tension these days between rich and poor. But, the increase has been just about the same. They've all gone up in the past 2 years, which I found interesting, Ezra. The jump is about the same between the two parties, 17 and 18%, Republican and Democrats. So the jump in this perception is across party lines, Ezra.
Did you hear that? Clyburn's response was so incoherent that Matthews didn't even know what to say. Sometimes it's really obvious when a politician has a very clear set of prepared talking points that he or she plans on sticking to, because in this case, Clyburn's responses to Matthews' questions didn't really match up with what exactly he was asking. Like this, for example.
Mr. Clyburn, you only have a few seconds left, but it's part of this that people are reading about billionaires, and there's so many. You're reading a lot about people with superior, unbelievable incomes compared to when other people are scratching along day to day.
Yes, I would agree with Ezra that some of that's the case. Look, when you have a billionaire out of the first or second richest man in this country saying to the public that I think it's unfair that I, a billionaire, am paying 16% on my income and my secretary is paying 26, 27% on her income. And I think that's unfair. That gets the attention of the American people, and I think the people are now saying, look, even the ones who are benefiting.
Okay,
Look, when we were doing the so-called super committee, I heard from many millionaires who said it's unfair.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. It's great having you on, sir.
Now, when I heard that, that's when I decided to make a video, because I feel like I have debunked this myth that a lot of these very wealthy people want to pay higher taxes. You could tell pretty much in that clip that he was talking about Warren Buffett. He didn't mention him by name, but it was pretty obvious that he was. And I discussed in a previous video how Warren Buffett says he should pay higher taxes, but he really doesn't want to. And it's very hypocritical for him to call for raising the top income tax rates, or just income taxes in general, especially since most of his income comes from capital gains. But what I really want to call your attention to is this. Last August, on my blog, I posted a lengthy and well-researched article entitled 5 Left-Wing Myths About the Economy. One of the myths was that many wealthy Americans wanted to pay higher taxes, and I feel like I have really debunked this myth. Of the 5 myths that I listed and systematically debunked, I think that one was by far the easiest to expose and disprove. It's a very insightful article, and I highly recommend you read it if you haven't already. But Clyburn's just mention of this, that maybe people who are making a lot of money do think the tax system is unfair, but if they're not sending a bigger check to the government, then no one should take them seriously. They ought to put their money where their mouth is. That's just how I feel. I just wanted to cut in here because something happened while we were filming this video that we decided to cut out. So to avoid another sloppy edit, I just decided to insert this clip in here because I wanted to come back to something the congressman said in his interview. When Congressman Clyburn said,
there was something untoward about the way those taxes impacted certain groups in our society.
I wasn't quite sure what he meant, because it sounded like he was suggesting that some people had been disadvantaged by the Bush tax cuts, that the Bush tax cuts had had a negative impact on some people, which doesn't really make any sense to me because, well, I don't know anyone who was negatively impacted by the Bush tax cuts. I can't even conceive of a scenario where reducing tax rates per se would have a negative effect on some people. Now, I suppose that if you're not a taxpayer, then it's possible you would see no benefit as a result of the tax cuts. But to imply that somehow the result of the 2 tax cuts that were passed in 2001 and 2003 somehow put some people at a disadvantage doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what he's basing that on. All right, well, look, just check out that article and the other articles I mentioned on my blog. There's the address. I'll leave that up there so you can type it into the address bar on your computer. I also have a website, but I don't really care if you visit that or not. I guess that'll do it. Well, I hope you have a happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend. And as always, Jim Clyburn, don't mess with the right-wing genius.